Hi, everybody. I am Richard, and I'm a member of the All Souls Unitarian Universalist Forum Committee. Welcome to the All Souls Forum. Our mission is to provide a platform for the discussion of significant issues, especially those affecting ethical values in our contemporary world, and to promote critical thinking. In the time of COVID-19, we will be meeting online every Sunday at 10 a.m. until we can resume in-person services. We recognize the limitation of the Zoom platform. However, we are confident that we can provide quality programs. Today, it is my privilege to introduce Lynn Barnett, who is a clinical social worker that specializes in gender issues. She will be talking about the issue of trans and non-binary issues. When we are done, Lynn will do a short break, and I will do a short break, excuse me. We'll take up the collection, and then we'll move into our structured question and answer session. With that, Lynn, please take it away.
Hi. I'd like to start by talking about what transgender is. I recognize that many of you know what transgender is, what being transgender is, or the concept of transgender and non-binary is, but I feel like there are folks out there who don't know some of the terminology, and in any situation, it would be a really good idea to understand the terminology that's being used. So I'm going to start there. And then we're going to talk about other issues, including children and adults and the community and resources. And hopefully by the time we're done, we'll have a better idea of what standing up for the transgender and non-binary community really means. So let's start. The first term is gender identity. And gender identity refers to someone's internal sense of being a male or a female or neither or both. And there are people who in our world who don't necessarily identify as being male or female, or sometimes they consider themselves being sometimes male and sometimes female. The term AMAB or AFAB you might see out there means assigned male or female at birth. And it refers to the sex that the child is assigned based on their chromosomes or their anatomy or their hormones. And that's what assigned female or male at birth means. There was a term used before that was male to female or female to male, and it really was very uncomfortable for a lot of people who were transgender. So this term, assigned female or assigned male at birth, is a much better term, much more up-to-date term. A transgender person is somebody whose gender identity does not match with their sex that they were assigned at birth. While a non-binary person or a person who is non-conforming is somebody who identifies somewhere on the spectrum between male and female, maybe on one end, maybe on the other, somewhere in the middle. Another term that I know about is genderqueer. That's another term that's used. And a lot of people have a hard time with sexual orientation. Sexual orientation refers to the person, the gender or the person that somebody is sexually attracted to. And being transgender and being having a sexual orientation are not synonymous, they're different. So one can see themselves as, they can identify as being transgender, but be sexually attracted to somebody of the same gender, a different gender, another person is transgender or non-binary. So they're not the same. Gender dysphoria refers to a term that means that a person's body and their how they think of themselves don't match. And when I first started working with transgender clients, I really had to understand that concept. And the way that I did that in my head was that I thought, I feel like I'm 32 years old, and I feel like I weigh about 118 in my head. That's my visual image of myself. But when I look in the mirror, I see somebody who's 66, a little bit wrinkled, and not 118 pounds. And that term is actually called body dysmorphia, but that body dysphoria, it is a more serious, it's a more stressful issue, because if I had body dysphoria, I would look in the mirror and I would think I'm a boy, but I see the body of a girl. And that can be very disturbing, and it can lead to depression and anxiety. It can lead to suicidal ideation. It's not a mental illness, but it is a mental issue that needs to be dealt with. And body dysphoria is diagnosed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and it's used by professionals and insurance companies, but it's not a mental illness. But it is a diagnosis. And when I work with people who are transgender, I will give them that diagnosis so they can go to a clinic or a hospital and be treated. So, as a therapist, I work with families who are from the ages of 3 on up. And the families that come to see me, they come to me often very distressed, because their child has come to them and told them that they are dysphoric, or they have a 3 or a 4 or a 10-year-old who is saying that they are a girl and they were assigned a boy at birth. And the parents very often will come to me and they will be very disturbed by this, and they're often reeling. And the first thing I tell them is to breathe, so that they can begin to that process of talking about the issue. When young children come to my office and they are telling me that they're transgender, that they see themselves as a gender that they were not assigned at birth, they're a lot more relaxed than the parents are. The parents don't quite know what to do, and they have to, they're dealing with all the societal stuff, and the child is simply being who they are. So one of the questions that the parents will often ask me is this a phase? Will this go away? And what I tell them is that if the child is consistent in their assertion that they are the gender were not assigned at birth, if they're insistent that their parents call them by another pronoun and another name, and if they're persistent, then it's not a phase. And at that point, it's time to sit down and talk and put together a plan on how that needs to happen. And the first thing I suggest is that they begin the process of socially transitioning. And they socially transition within the home first. I use the example of my son when I talk about this, because my son came to us as a little girl from China at the age of 1.5. But by the age of 5, Isaac was already insisting that he was a boy and wanting to wear boy clothes and wanting to do boy things and not wanting to wear dresses or play with dolls or he wanted to play basketball, and he wanted to play basketball pretty aggressively, and he often would get into games of basketball with adults and would win. We were really kind of dubious about this because he had been born in China, and we were a little concerned that maybe the experience of having been born in China was part of this issue. So we kept an eye on what was going on. By the age about 7 or 8, he was continuing to be insistent and consistent, and he wanted to socially transition at that point, wanted to wear all boy clothes, and he still wanted to wear boy clothes into his early adolescence. He was very disturbed by the fact that he was going through puberty as a girl. That was very concerning for him. And he really wanted to hide that. So I noticed that there were a lot more big sweatshirts and a lot more oversized clothing. And there was a slump to his shoulder so that those parts of his body didn't show. Now, keep in mind that this was 2010, 2011, and not as many kids were coming out. And so we continued to watch. At that time, I was working with a lot of children who were in foster care and children who were adopted, and I was working with kids who were on a panel talking about being LGBT and on a panel, and at that time, Isaac came to me and said, "I'm done. I can't do it. I'm transgender." So that was when we said, "Okay, it's time." So insistent, consistent, persistent, and that's how you know. So one of the things that I hear a lot with my families is, can we change them back? And that's really concerning for me, because trying to change a child back to, or trying to change their gender identity by the use of denial or punishment or conversion therapy is dangerous. And it can permanently damage a child and or an adolescent's mental health. It's been condemned by the association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, the pediatric associations, and many other organizations, and can actually lead to suicidal ideation and hospitalization. It's best to be supportive, to allow the child or the adolescent time to explore their gender and to sort it out. And that's where I often tell parents, breathe. They'll get it figured out. They'll get it worked out. The concept of exploring somebody's gender is right now particularly similar to kids who are dyeing their hair or wearing different clothes and that kind of thing. I think if we try to push and try to pull them back and make them conform, it doesn't help. And if we allow our kids to just explore naturally, they work it out, they figure it out. And if they're transgender, they're going to continue to be transgender. And if that's where they are, then being supportive is going to be the best help we can give them. And I say that a lot. So talk a little bit about being an ally to our community. transgender community. How's the best way to be an ally to somebody who comes out to you as transgender or gender non-binary? I thought about this, and I thought about the best way to go about doing that. I think the first thing we have to do is listen, and just listen to what's being said, and let your friend talk, or let your child talk, or let your brother talk, or your uncle, or your cousin, or this person you've never met before. Just let them talk. Let them tell you who they are. Ask them if they have a name that they want you to call them, and ask what pronouns they prefer, and then use them. Don't out a person to other people. And because this is their story, this is them, they get the opportunity to tell people who they are. And allow your friends, or your friend or your relative to come out to people in their own time. If you know somebody who's transgender and you knew them from before, don't talk about them to other people as, well, this is my friend George, he used to be Mary. Just introduce your friend. Introduce your friend as Mary. They use they, them, or they use he, she, her pronouns. And of course, if you hear somebody talking in a derogatory manner, it's a really good idea to step up and advocate for that person. You would want them to do that for you. Another thing that I think is really important is learning about the concerns of the transgender and gender non-binary community. The more you know, the more you can be an advocate. And we all need advocates in this world. Talking about respectful terminology. I've thought about this a great deal, because when we as human beings are taught to look at somebody and figure out whether they're male, female, white, black, Hispanic, I mean, we use our eyes, we use our own way of figuring out who somebody is by the way they look. But gender is a little trickier than that, because people don't always, trans women don't always dress like women, and trans men don't always dress like typical men, and people who are non-binary have their own style. They have their own way of being. So it's really important when you don't know what to call somebody, that you ask them, what are your pronouns? I ask children what their pronouns the minute they walk in the door, every child, because I don't know. I say, what's your name? What are your pronouns? I do that with teenagers. What's your name? What are your pronouns? Because I want them to tell me, so that I can use the name and the pronoun that they prefer, that they see themselves as. And that's a really important piece, because people will tell you who they are and what terminology to use. Don't use wrong pronouns intentionally. Or if you catch somebody doing that, correct them, because it's a sign that you don't respect them, and we want to respect other people. There's a term called dead naming, and a lot of my teenagers use this term, dead naming. So I want to talk about it a minute, because it means calling somebody by their given name or their birth name or their old name. And it's a sign of disrespect. And children, I will tell you, children and teens and adolescents, every single one of them rail against that. They're very disturbed when somebody dead names them. So, and it's a sign of very disrespectful behavior, very much like using any other terminology that shows disrespect to Black people or to Jews or to any group of people. Don't dead name somebody. Use the word that, the name that they've given you. Use that name. And if you slip up, it's okay. Just say, I'm sorry. Parents have a tendency to accidentally misgender or misname their children. And I must say that whenever I've been in a position to call my son by his original name, I will misgender him the rest of the day. So I always call him Isaac. I always call him by he, him. I don't go back in time and say, well, when Isaac was, because it messes up my pronouns every time. And I suggest to parents that they do that as well, that they call the child the name that they've been given and use that no matter how old a child they're talking about in the past, because it helps them to remember. Be gender inclusive. When I was talking to my wife this morning about this, we were trying to figure out how to change from when you're addressing an audience, we don't want to say ladies and gentlemen anymore, because we don't know what our audience is. So we say friends, or we say hello. We don't use ladies and gentlemen anymore because we want to be inclusive. And we were talking about the use of ma'am and sir and as a way of being respectful, but those terms are no longer helpful, because you don't know if you're calling somebody ma'am and they're a sir, or a sir and they're a ma'am, or they're not either. So that's really important that we pay attention to that. And as I looked it up, I realized that just not using those terms and using a person's name is more acceptable. So I've heard the term a lot. I hear the term a lot from parents in particular. This is this person's trend. This is a transgender. People are people, so they're not a transgender any more than they would be a Black or they would be a white. They are a transgender person or a non-binary person. They're not a trans, they're a trans person. And we want to use that language because we want to be inclusive of all of us. So we might use the term friend. So I have a story to tell you. And this is going to relate to a lot of people that I'm talking to today, because we are learning. I'm in my 60s, and many of us are in their 40s and 50s and 60s. So we didn't grow up with this concept. But my mom, who was 93, was on a video call one day with the Sierra Club, and I happened to be there. And the moderator of the group said, would everybody please introduce themselves using their name and their pronouns? And my mom kind of looked up at me like, okay, what does that mean? And I said, what are your pronouns? Because I didn't want to, think otherwise. And so she said, my pronouns are she, her. I said, yes. And that's it. I said, that's what you say. Many of you are going to hear that question. People, at some point, somebody's going to say, and what are your pronouns? And a lot of us think in our head, well, it's obvious. It's obvious what our pronouns are. But it really isn't. And by being respectful, they are asking you to tell them who you are. So I think that's really important, and Mom was able to do that, and has noticed recently that people are using their pronouns at the end of their lines. You know, like it would be Lynn Barnett, LMSW, or LCSW, she, her. Pronouns are she, her, and a lot of people are using those, because we're now in a world where it's not necessarily obvious that we are male or female, that we might be considering ourselves to be non-binary or gender non-conforming. And we don't necessarily have that out there. So, and I actually skipped over this, that there is a pronoun out there that a lot of people are a little bit uncomfortable with, and that is them, they. And Zer, which is spelled Z-I or Z-E, and then Zer, which is Z-U-R. It is another derivation of them, they. There are lots of micropronouns out there that I'm learning about. But the use of them, they, for folks who are identifying as non-binary and gender non-conforming, are really important. And I had a situation where a friend of mine was saying, well, I put my foot down and I draw the line at using them, they. Well, how do you do that? I'm sorry, but I'm not going to use them, they, because that's the pronoun that you prefer. So think about that. If a person identifies as gender non-conforming or gender non-binary, and they would like you to use them, they, as their pronoun, respect that. It's hard because we grew up with them, they being plural. We grew up with referring to somebody, to a group of people as they, or a group of people as them. But this is a comfortable pronoun for people. So I think the most important thing is that if you respect somebody, or if you care about somebody, you're gonna use the pronoun that's going to be comfortable for them because you care about them. And even though it's uncomfortable and we're not used to it, it's a sign that we care, and that's really important. We're living in a world where our children and our grandchildren are growing up with transgender and gender non-binary friends, siblings, relatives. I would guess that many of you have a transgender or non-binary friend, relative, sibling. Schools are having to adjust to having gender-neutral bathrooms, gender-neutral locker rooms. And teachers and staff are having to learn how to address their gender expansive students, and sometimes their gender expansive staff members. And I suspect that many of you will be asked what your pronouns are in the near future. And we'll ask somebody else what their pronouns are and what the preferred name is, because as we become a more inclusive and accepting country, we'll see this more and more. By the way, my pronouns are she, her. Thanks. I'm happy to answer questions from anybody.
All right. Thank you, Lynn. That was wonderful. We are going to do a brief break here, and we're going to get a handsome man up there to tell us about how we can do the collection. While the video is loading, I do want to remind everyone that our speaker next week is Jason Miles from Reaching Out From Within, and he's going to be talking about prison reform. Your donations tend to keep the forum strong, and we do, pay our tech people who are so nice to help us out. So if you can, please go to the link in the chat and donate. You can specify that it will go directly to the forum. And that way you can also mail your check directly to 4501 Walnut, KCMO 64111. That's that. Now we're going to move into a structured question and answer time. If you have a question, please raise your hand by clicking on reactions, which is the little smiley face down on the bottom, and then clicking on raise hand. I'm going to do it real quick. It'll look like that. And then I'll know to call on you. If you're on your phone, I believe it's *9. Anyway, so I'll jump in here. With conversion therapy, does the ban that the city of Kansas City passed include gender identity, or is it just for sexual orientation?
Well, I think it's sexual orientation because it's the only one that's protected, but I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to look that up and make sure.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything? Carol Fields, you're up.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I hadn't thought about that. And then Prairie Village, I think, just passed. And wait a minute now, I'm getting my memory's so bad. All the new things that are coming out on all of our little villages in Kansas. Thinking of Roland Park and Prairie Village, and they're bigger than Roland Park where we are. And so sometimes they get ahead of us, sometimes we get ahead of them on improving our diversity issues. So that's, yeah, so there has to be a lot of different language to cover, or because of federal law, there's really only one thing that usually goes into local legislation about therapy.
Is there a question in there?
Well,
Carol?
yeah, so you had that question about Kansas City's ordinance. So I'm trying to figure out how typical that is and whether that's going to be what's going on the Kansas side too.
So I do know that, because I know that sexual orientation is protected in Missouri. It's actually not protected in Kansas as far as I know, but it's protected in Missouri. Gender identity is not protected in here in the two-state area. It's only actually protected in a few states, but I don't know how that works with conversion therapy. I know that there are some conversion therapy places in this two-state area. They worry me a lot. Our hospitals right now are full of children who are dealing with unsupportive family or an unsupportive foster families, and we don't need any more kids out there who are dealing with conversion of any kind.
I have to look again at the Roland Park ordinance in terms of discrimination, and ours is better than the state. So
I think Prairie Village is too.
Yeah.
Do you feel that part of the reason why we're seeing more acceptance of trans people amongst younger people has something to do with positive trans images in the media, like maybe Caitlyn Jenner or something in the entertainment media?
Well, I think that they're seeing a lot more. I actually think that a lot more kids are coming out or are feeling more comfortable about coming out because of the internet. because it's not just our city. It's throughout the country. And when I ask kids now, how did you figure out that you were transgender? They almost always tell me that they were on the internet and that they saw this guy or that guy. YouTube is full of transgender people talking about their process. So when a child or a youth, adolescent is questioning their gender, they get on the internet and they'll go and they YouTube transgender males or transgender females, and there's a lot of information out there. There are a lot of people out there who are doing it. There's also more kids in school where there may not have been any transgender kids at teenagers, for example, at Olathe East. They now have several. And the same is true of the different high schools. They, the gay straight alliances and the organizations in high schools and middle schools have gotten much bigger. They have teachers now who are sponsoring them. So they're finding that they're getting support in all places. Even grade schools are being more supportive of their gender expansive and transgender kids all over the country. So the more it's accepted, the more you're going to see it. We didn't, when I was a kid and I was at school, it would never have dawned on me ever to have told anybody what I thought or what I felt about my sexual orientation. I can't imagine. And the people I know who are transgender who've come out since then would never have told anybody that they were transgender because it wasn't accepted. But now it's a lot more. I think you're right about Caitlyn Jenner and other people who've come out. And there's a trans man who's come out who was in the movie Juno. And that I think a lot of transgender boys were very excited about that. So seeing their heroes and the people that they watch come out as transgender. Another area is the area of I have to think here, manga, anime. And there are a lot of transgender characters on anime. And a lot of teenagers see anime. And so I get a lot of answers like that as well.
Renee, go ahead.
I have a question about introducing a friend who may have come out to you, but maybe not to other people in the group, even if other people in the group already know them. How do you respect their current choice of pronouns without accidentally outing them to people who they may not be comfortable having that knowledge?
Ask them. How would you?
And that was my answer to myself as well, if you have that conversation ahead of time. But if you're just walking down the street and you pass someone, what then?
Ask them. If you're walking down the street with a friend, greet them like you would have greeted them before. I think that it's always a good idea if you have a friend before you meet them with other people to ask them what they prefer. If you're not sure, don't use a pronoun at all. Just stay away from the pronouns, because if you use, this is my friend, and she or they or he, just stay away from the pronoun. And then I think you'd be safer if they're using a name, I think it's easy to get stuck with, okay, I don't know if I should use their name either.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, I just say hi. I think if, I think it's easy to become overly careful, and overly cautious. And I think sometimes we just have to, it was funny. I didn't want, for a really long time, I was really uncomfortable with changing pronouns with my son, and I didn't use pronouns for about 2 years. I called Isaac, or SB, or whatever they were at the time. And I didn't use pronouns at all because I didn't know what to do. So one of the things I didn't touch on is the process or the clinics in Kansas City. There are several clinics in Kansas City that work with transgender and gender non-binary people. And so I want to kind of talk a little bit about that. Can I do that now? Can I do that here?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. KU Med has one of the best. They in my mind, they're one of the best clinics in the country. They have a wonderful gender clinic. For children, Children's Mercy has their Gender Pathways Clinic, and I think they are outstanding. They do a wonderful job of working with kids and helping them through the process. They do an assessment when the child is younger, and then they kind of back up and let the child get older. And when the child is old enough, and the child and the parents and the child and the doctor have decided that they need to go on puberty blockers to stop the process temporarily of puberty, they can do that. And then they can reassess when it's time to introduce the hormone therapy, but they are wonderful about figuring out when that happens. And I leave that to them. I will refer clients, and Children's Mercy and KU Med refer clients to me every day. There's also Truman Medical Center. They have a gender clinic, and KC Care has one. And I think Planned Parenthood also prescribes hormone therapy as well. They all are outstanding organizations, and so we have great support here in the city. There's also great support in the city as far as helping parents. There's a program. There's a group called Transparent. There are several groups that work with teenagers and adolescents. There's an organization called Transitions. I think there's Equal. There's Passages. Passages is a very old organization. There are organizations that support families who are transgender. And there are, I actually was on the board of Passages several years ago. So there's a lot of organizations. I do a group for children. I probably do one of the only groups for children in the city, young children. I do a group for teenagers, and they are wonderful. It's my favorite day of the week is my teenager and my kid groups. So we have lots of support in Kansas City. We have lots of people who care a great deal. And I think that that's really important to be an inclusive city, to lend support to our families who are learning how to parent children who are gender variant. Okay, on to another question.
So do you feel with the coming out and the images in the media and stuff that it sort of has a snowball effect? Like, it's safer for more people to come out, so they come out, and then it becomes an even better environment because they've come out to their friends and relatives. And then it's safer for more people to come out, and just kind of has that snowball thing.
I think that that's true. I think it's safer. I think it's easier. I think people are more comfortable coming out to and being who they are, being their authentic self. I think we're finding more and more children and teenagers who are accepting themselves as non-binary. And I think that that's an important piece too. I think, I grew up feeling kind of androgynous most of my life, and it would, and I don't necessarily think of myself as gender nonconforming, although my teenage group has told me that they think I am. But I don't see that, but it would have been nice for, to have been able to have that. And I think kids are able to feel more comfortable with wherever they are because their friends are. And they've got, most of the kids that I work with have friends who are transgender or gender non-binary, and they're very accepting. They're very accepting of one another. There's less bullying because of this too. I see a lot less bullying. And when there is bullying, for example, Lee Summit High School, where a child was bullied and the friends got together and said, no, I don't think so. And that was very exciting. That was very cool. I think that people are less, I think kids are less likely to bully kids who have a support network.
Thank you. Lynn, you can now ask Lynn a question.
Okay, I am Gina. I'm Lynn's wife. I want to ask Lynn, can you go back to the cisgender part of your presentation just for a hot second?
Oh, you know what? I am so glad you reminded me of that. You know what? We've been talking about transgender people, and we've been talking about gender nonconforming or gender binary people, but there's actually a term for cisgender people, for those who were born as male and identify as male, and there are people who are born as female and identify as female, and that term is called cisgender. And I think, there are folks who don't quite know what that is and feel a little uncomfortable with it, but I think it's important that we put that out there, that there's a term for folks who identify as the gender that they were born with. Thanks for asking.
I have a quick question about terminology. You had made a comment that assigned at birth was a good way to talk about the gender they were assigned at birth. Is biological also okay, or is that a little offensive, like biological girl or something?
I think biological was a term that was used back in about 2010, 2012. I belong to a couple of organizations, Gender Spectrum in particular really looks down on that term. They would prefer assigned male or assigned female at birth. And that's, I think that's also very inclusive of people who are intersex. And people who are intersex have the chromosomes or the genetics or the biology of both genders. And so a child might be born and assigned female at birth, and then they do the chromosomal work and they find out that the person really isn't that, they're something else. So when we say assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth, we're really saying, okay, according to these things, this is what we're calling this person, but we're also including intersex people in that. And I think it's a more cutting edge, more technically correct term. Because as we look at people, remember, we're looking at people going, okay, they've got this hair and they've got these clothes and they look like this and they look like that, and so we're going to put them in that category over here, boy, or we're going to put them in that category over here, girl. And very often when people walk into my office, I'm not sure if somebody, I have a young lady, I have a person who I work with, who is on the autism spectrum, and who presents, if somebody else were to see this person, they would present looking very female. Somebody else would put them in the female column, but they don't identify as female, they identify as male. And I think we as a community have to kind of back away and get away from the idea of, okay, this is what this person looks like, and instead ask the question and not assume that, okay, this person was assigned female at birth, or this person looks like this, and so they must be this. That's another thing I think I probably ought to mention is that there seems to be a very strong correlation between people who are on the autism spectrum and people who are also gender expansive or non-binary or transgender. And they're not quite sure why that is, but I really do believe that it's because gender doesn't mean quite the same to somebody who is on the autism spectrum. And so there'll be more research out about that. But there seem to be more people who are on the autism spectrum that are identifying as transgender or gender non-binary.
I do want to remind everyone, in case you're getting off, that next week our speaker will be Jason Miles, and he will be talking about the topic of prison reform. Please join via the same link just before 10 a.m., although I am sure, as we are all Unitarians, most people will log on 5 or 10 minutes after. All right.